I want to discuss the amendment, which is the importance of the authorization for the U.S. use of military force to the ongoing U.S. operations against violent extremist organizations. First of all, let's point out that it's important to acknowledge why our current fight against terrorism is necessary. Earlier this week, we commemorated the anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks that took the lives of thousands of innocent Americans, shook our nation to its core, and importantly, brought us together in common resolve to make sure that that kind of tragedy would never, ever happen again. In pursuit of that noble goal, thousands of brave men and women in uniform are currently deployed in Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other places. No matter what else we do in this body and on this legislation, we must always ask ourselves if we are doing everything we can to support those service members as they risk their lives to defend us. At the same time, we must recognize the ways in which the current conflict is different than from when Congress passed the first authorization for the use of military force in 2001. The landscape of the global fight against terrorism has changed dramatically with the emergence of ISIS and the spread of the threat beyond Afghanistan and Iraq. And that's why I and many others have long called for updating the AUMFs. And yet the nature of the conflict remains the same. Terrorist organizations continue to warp the religion of Islam and promote a radical ideology to recruit new fighters and plot violent attacks as part of their jihad against the United States of America and all that we stand for. As chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I'm open to a process that would develop a new AUMF specific to the current fight against ISIS and other terrorist organizations as identified by the administration. I'd be very willing to work with my colleagues, including the chairman and ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, as well as the senator from Kentucky, to ensure that the legislation proceeded under regular order, includes hearing, a committee markup, and floor amendment process that ensured each member of this body was able to have his or her voice heard. Madam President, haven't we had enough of bringing things to the floor without hearings, without amendments, without debate? I'm confident that an overwhelming bipartisan majority of my colleagues would agree to approve the use of military force against the vicious, brutal enemy we face in ISIS and its associated forces. The amendment before us now falls far, far short of that process. Repealing the 2001 and 2002 AUMFs without simultaneously passing a new authorization would be premature, it would be irresponsible, and it would threaten U.S. national security, and it would inhibit our democracy-building efforts abroad. As we speak, we have troops deployed overseas engaged in the fight against ISIS, al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and other violent extremist organizations. Repealing the existing AUMFs without a replacement would jeopardize the legal authority for ongoing military operations. I cannot stand by silently as this body considers taking any action that would put our currently deployed service members at risk. It's also important to recognize that adopting this amendment would embolden our enemies. It would send a signal to the members of the U.S. Armed Forces serving in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere that Congress and the American public no longer support their mission and their sacrifice. We cannot send that message because it's not true. In closing, I agree with those supporting this amendment that the time has come for a new authorization for the use of military force in the global fight against terrorism. This amendment is simply not the way to do it. Rather than repealing the existing AUMFs without passing a new authorization, I urge my colleagues to work together on a new bipartisan AUMF that addresses the threats we face today. There are many members on both sides of the aisle that have been working together on AUMFs, including the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. That is a process in which I would be proud to participate, and it's one that would honor those currently deployed in harm's way fighting to make sure that our nation never sees another day like 9/11. But I cannot support anything that fails to provide our men and women in uniform with everything they need, including the legal authority to keep our nation safe.